Welcome back to Bellows Blades, where today we're going to do another Throwback Thursday review. For the Throwback Thursday reviews, I like to look at knives that have been on the market for at least 20 years, whether that's they came out and are no longer available on the market, or maybe they came out 20 years plus ago and they've just gone through multiple iterations since that time. But we want to look at some of these older knife styles, designs, things that were kind of revolutionary maybe at their time that they came out. And so that brings us to a great knife to review for a Thursday review, which is the Columbia River Knife and Tool M16. So we're going to go ahead and look at this model here, which is, like I mentioned, it's the M16. This specific model is the M1602. And this was a knife that was designed by Kit Carson. And you can just see that he put a lot of thought into this design, and we're going to go over that here as we look at it. So this knife was released in 1999. So it's been on the market for about 24 years now. I believe the first time I bought one of these would have been right around 2000, 2001 maybe. And so they hadn't been on the market very long at all at that point. Now the version that I originally bought had a 4-inch blade, and it was a much larger knife than this one that's here on the table today. I actually had that knife, carried it, loved it, carried it all the time, and managed to lose it. The first knife that I ever lost was a larger 4-inch version of the M16, and I replaced it with another model that was exactly the same. And then within, I think, about 6 months, I ended up losing that model. And so at that point, when I went to replace it for a third time, they no longer offered, at that time, the larger model. They only had this smaller 3-inch version of the knife. And so since that's all I could get, that's what I got. And that's the one that we have on the table today. I've still had this thing for getting pretty close to 20 years now that I've had this. And so I want to just review the basic design concept and the knife, the M16, that really in many ways put Columbia River Knife and Tool on the map. So as I mentioned, this is a Kit Carson design. One of the first things that really jumps out at you at the time, especially when it came out, was this thing right here, this flipper tab design. So I'm not going to say that Kit Carson came up with the flipper tab, but I will say that the M16 was the first, as far as I'm aware of, the first mass-produced flipper tab design knife. It really is what drew attention to that design. In fact, is so much so that this was originally referred to as the Carson flipper. So that was a kind of a newer, unique idea or design in the knife world at the time. And this is the knife that really put it out there in the popular consciousness of the knife community. So that was one of the things that drew me to this knife. I love being able to open it by just flipping the tab rather than using the thumb stud. And when it first came out, it really didn't have a lot of variation. You had the aluminum handle, you had the Tonto style blade, and I think you could either get it partially serrated or plain. After a little bit of time, they then introduced a spear point style blade for this. And then since then, they have literally introduced dozens of variants of this knife with different handle materials, synthetic handle materials instead of the aluminum. But for the most part, they've stuck with the two blade styles, either this style or the spear point, and then either partially serrated or plain. As far as I know, those are really the main designs that they've had. I think they did have for a while kind of a broader, not really a true spear point, but a little bit of a broader shaped blade. But I think for the most part, they've stuck to those two styles. Like I said, right now you can get this in a whole bunch of different designs and even different steel types right now. So when this first came out, it came out in the AUS 8 or AUS 8 steel, which is what this one's in. And the two previous versions that I owned were both in that steel. But I believe over the years, they've had it in a variety of different steels. All of them more or less, though, right around the same quality as the AUS 8 steel. So usually not a real high-end steel, kind of a middle-tier steel. But very workable, very usable. One of the things that came out with the somewhat, I don't want to say later models, but not the first couple years they had it, they introduced a locking system to this. So this is a liner lock knife, but they introduced what they call their AutoLAWKS system. So this is a little tab that you can push up, and it locks the knife so that you cannot unlock the liner lock until you take off that safety, if you will. And then that allows you to go ahead and close the knife. So that is a newer addition at the point that I bought this knife. They didn't have that prior to this version. And then it became pretty common on most of their M16 designs. So This knife, like I said, this knife really kind of put Columbia River Knife and Tool on the map. They, I believe, had been open as a company since 1994, I think it was. So they had been around for about 5 years before they introduced this knife to the market. But when this knife hit the market, it became so popular so quickly, and to this day is probably their best-selling model knife, that it really just got their name out there in the knife community and built a good reputation for them because it's such a solid knife. I believe that Kit Carson had a military background, and you can kind of see that in this design. Very functional use, heavy use design, kind of utilitarian in nature. And I just think he did a great job with this. Not only the flipper tab. So some of the other things that you can see in this design that he thought out really well. The flipper tab, when deployed, of course, serves as a finger guard, and that's even more pronounced on the larger versions. And some versions actually now have a tab on either side, so it's almost like a cross hilt design. The other thing is that the thumb stud, which is a second option for you to open the knife, also serves as a stop pin. So you can see there that when this opens, you've got a notch carved out of the handle scale that thumb stud slaps into place and acts as a stop pin. So it's just an extra layer of security, keeping that blade when it's locked open in a very secure, stable position. So really well thought out. Of course, the aluminum handles are my favorite. I prefer these over any of the synthetic materials that they offer. You've got the holes cut in, kind of skeletonized type scales to kind of reduce the weight of the knife, which does a good job. Overall, just a really good feeling knife. Now, I will say that I carry the larger version all the time, and this version is too small for me. The 3-inch blade, the handle just doesn't fit my hand. I can only get 3 fingers on it. It just doesn't fit my hands very well. So this thing hasn't seen a lot of time in my pockets, which is a vast difference from the previous model that saw all kinds of time in my pocket. I carried it all the time, but this one really just a little too small for me. But I would encourage, if you've never had a chance to hold an M16, you really ought to get one of these in your hand and check it out. Just a solid design by Kit Carson. Like I said, at this point, well respected in the knife community. To give you an idea of the size of this particular knife, well, first thing is you can see here, blade length is 3 inches, handle length is a little over 4, about almost 4 1/4, and the overall length of the knife is about 7 1/4. To compare it to some other knives that people know well, there's a Paramilitary 2, and then here is the Benchmade Griptilian. So you can see, based on the size here, that knife is just a little too small for me. It's not much. If they added basically another 1/4 inch, I think I would be fine with the knife. But this particular model is just a little too small. But like I said, now you can purchase it with the larger blade, I think up to the roughly 4-inch blade, which is really the design that I prefer and I would recommend. So kind of wrapping this all up, guys, a knife that's been on the market for 20 plus years, has gone through multiple iterations, different blade steels, different handle materials. But basically, it all comes down to that rock solid design that Kit Carson came up with the flipper tab, and that kind of very utilitarian look and design. Just a great knife overall. The one thing I will mention that I don't want anybody to pick one up and be disappointed in is if you've gotten used to modern flipper tab designs, they're very smooth. A lot of them have ball bearings and all that. Now, I'll be honest, I have not held an M16 of any version that's come out probably in the last 10 years. So all the ones that I've handled or dealt with are the older, earlier models. But at least on those models, you don't have a real smooth action on that flipper tab. You can see if I just do that, I'm not getting much there. You've got to really either pull back real hard, which even then doesn't a lot of times work, or basically what I always did was put a little bit of a wrist flip into the action when you're opening it, and that'll give you more authority in the snap open. It just doesn't glide the way that modern knives do. So be aware of that. If you're somebody who's looking for a fidget knife, this is probably not the knife. But it is a rock solid knife, a good usable knife with decent steel, good handle materials, and a proven design that has existed now for 20 plus years and really built a name for itself and for the company. So I think this was a great knife to look at for Throwback Thursday. If you've never handled one, get your hands on one, see what you think. Just a really solid design by Kit Carson and Columbia River Knife and Tool. All right, guys, that's it for this review. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you're enjoying the channel, and we will catch you next time with another knife review on Bellows Blades.